What do you do when everything you love is taken from you in a single cruel moment? When the laughter of your daughter, so full of life, and the gentle presence of the woman you built your world with, are ripped away in the cold machinery of fate? Do you fall to your knees and scream at the sky, demand an answer from a silent universe? Or do you do the unthinkable? Do you breathe? This is not a question most men are prepared to answer, because most men, until the moment comes, believe they'll never be tested like that. They believe pain comes gradually, predictably, with warning, but life doesn't send warnings. It doesn't care about the size of your heart, the innocence of your child, the promises you made. It just takes. This is the story of Daniel Reeves, a man whose life, once ordinary, once blessed, was torn to pieces in one moment. A man who walked through the kind of fire that leaves most broken beyond recognition, and somehow emerged scarred, silent, but not broken. A man who discovered not through books or gurus, but through raw experience what it truly means to let go, and what Stoic philosophy, often misunderstood, often simplified, has to say about the kind of strength no one teaches you about. The strength to surrender. The day the world ended. Daniel Reeves wasn't special, and that's what made him so relatable. He was the man you pass at the coffee shop, polite, efficient, calm. He loved spreadsheets, quiet mornings, family routines. He was the guy who fixed the sink on Saturdays, grilled hot dogs on Memorial Day, and never forgot to kiss his daughter goodnight. Maria, his wife of 10 years, was his balance. Bright, caring, fiery when needed. Ellie, their 6-year-old girl, was the light of the home. She had her mother's wit and her father's calm eyes. Their life wasn't perfect, but it was good. And for Daniel, that was enough. He didn't want more. He didn't chase power or recognition. He just wanted this, the sacred normalcy of a life well lived. But there's a cruel irony in tragedy. It often strikes those who treasure peace the most. And on a rainy Friday afternoon, peace ended. The email came in during a project call, a generic local news alert. 3-vehicle accident on I-87, multiple fatalities. He barely noticed until his phone rang and the number on the screen froze his blood. The police, a short, clipped voice, the words you only hear in films. "Sir, I'm so sorry to inform you." Time collapsed. At 4:39 p.m., Daniel was a father, a husband. At 4:40, he was alone. No sound, just the phone dropping from his hand, and his knees hitting the floor like stone on stone. They were gone, just gone. That night, the house was not silent. It was hollow. There's a difference. Silence can be peaceful, but hollowness is oppressive. A sucking void where life used to be. No footsteps, no giggles, no clatter in the kitchen, just the echo of loss. He sat on Ellie's bed for hours, her pillow still warm with memory, the stuffed animal she called Mr. Lion clutched in his hands. He didn't cry at first. He couldn't. His grief was too large for tears. It just sat on his chest, a boulder, immovable. He walked into the bathroom at 3 a.m., looked in the mirror, and saw someone he didn't recognize. Eyes hollow, face pale, hands shaking. He whispered, not to God, but to himself, "Why am I still here?" Some friends came by. They left casseroles and flowers. They said things like, "Time heals," or "Stay strong." Daniel didn't blame them. They were just trying. But nothing they said could reach the cavern inside his soul. Every man has a moment in life where he stands at a crossroads, not of success or failure, but of survival, collapse, or confront. And Daniel had just met his. But here's the truth. Pain doesn't knock before entering. It kicks the door down and walks in uninvited. And in that moment, a man must ask, what will I do with this pain? Will I run from it? Will I let it consume me? Or will I do the one thing that Stoic men have practiced for centuries? Will I stand still and face it? Because that is the essence of Stoic philosophy. Not emotional numbness, not pretending everything's okay, but facing the unbearable without resistance. Daniel didn't know that yet. All he knew was that his world had ended, and yet somehow the sun would rise again the next day, and so would he, but not as the man he once was. That man died on the same day as Maria and Ellie. The one who remained would now begin a journey not of healing, but of transformation. Grief without resistance. The first week after the funeral, Daniel didn't speak to anyone, not because he couldn't, but because there was nothing left to say. What words could describe the sensation of walking through a house filled with memories, when the people who made those memories had vanished? The world around him rushed to react. Friends, colleagues, even strangers online once they read about the crash. You need to talk to someone. Grief counseling works wonders. Let yourself break down. It's healthy. Everyone meant well, but something inside Daniel didn't trust those suggestions. It wasn't pride. It wasn't denial. It was something deeper, something ancient. He didn't want to be consumed by emotion. He didn't want to be expressive for the sake of it. He didn't want to perform his pain. He wanted to understand it. On the third night after the funeral, Daniel couldn't sleep. He wandered through the attic, searching for something, anything, to distract his mind. That's when he found it, a small box labeled Daniel-17. Inside, some old baseball cards, a Walkman, and a weathered paperback book. Its cover was cracked, the corners curled with time. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations, a gift from his grandfather, a quiet man who had served in Korea. Daniel had never understood why he'd given it. Back then, it felt like reading the thoughts of a dead emperor, had nothing to do with being a man in the 21st century. Now it felt like a lifeline. He opened it at random and landed on the line. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Daniel read that sentence 10 times, then 20. It was as if someone had finally spoken directly to the chaos inside him. Power over your mind, not power to change what had happened, not power to undo fate, but power to stand in the middle of it and not fall apart. That night, he didn't cry. He didn't break. He sat in the darkness of his living room, the book in his lap. And for the first time since the accident, he chose not to resist the silence. From that day forward, each morning began the same. No alarms, no phone, no coffee, just stillness. He would sit on the floor in the corner of Ellie's room where the sunlight touched the rug, eyes closed, breath steady. He didn't pray, he didn't plead. He simply observed his thoughts, his pain, his memories, not to judge them, not to drown in them, but to see them clearly, to meet them like old friends who had come to visit. At first, it was unbearable. The mind doesn't like stillness when it's hurting. It wants to run, to fight, to distract. But Daniel stayed, and in that staying, something extraordinary began to happen. The pain didn't go away, but it stopped screaming. It became quiet, present, manageable, like the way thunder sounds in the distance, not inside your chest, but somewhere far off. Grief, he realized, wasn't a monster to defeat. It was a companion to understand. And that was the first thing Stoicism taught him. Not to numb pain, not to deny pain, but to discipline his relationship with it. Because most modern advice told him to let it all out. But that advice often led men to fall into a loop of emotional indulgence, mistaking expression for healing. Daniel didn't want to perform his grief. He wanted to transform through it. Most men are taught to fight grief or flee it. But what if you simply observed it? What if you sat quietly with your pain and listened? not as a victim, but as a witness. That's what Stoicism offered Daniel, not escape, not denial, but a way to walk through the fire without burning. He began journaling the way Marcus Aurelius had. Each morning after his silent sit, he would write one thing he missed, one memory he was grateful for, one thought that tried to destroy him the day before. It wasn't therapy, it wasn't a cure, it was discipline. And through that, Daniel began to understand another truth. You can't control what happens, but you can control what you do with what happens. He wrote that sentence and taped it to the refrigerator, not for guests, for himself, because Stoicism didn't ask him to be emotionless. It asked him to be emotionally sovereign, to feel deeply but to remain rooted, to weep but not collapse, to carry loss without becoming lost. The world around him was confused by his calm. Some said he was too composed. Others whispered, he hasn't really processed it yet. They didn't understand. Daniel had processed it. He just wasn't performing the version of grief that made others comfortable, because grief isn't loud for every man. Sometimes it's silent. Sometimes it looks like sitting in a child's bedroom, breathing in sunlight and memory. Sometimes it looks like strength, not the kind that lifts weight, but the kind that holds steady, when everything inside you wants to fall. Daniel had not moved on. He had simply moved inward, and that, he realized, was the only path forward for a Stoic man. Through awareness, through discipline, through stillness.
The fire inside. There's a stage of grief no one talks about. It comes after the tears dry up, after the silence stops hurting and starts turning into anger. Not loud anger, not theatrical, but quiet, simmering rage, the kind that lives in the bones. That's what Daniel felt in month 2. He had made it through the first storm, the paralysis, the disbelief, the weight of absence. But now, something darker began to rise. He would sit at the kitchen table in the evenings, staring at 2 empty chairs. The one where Maria used to read her mystery novels, the little booster seat where Ellie would color while humming some tune she made up on the spot. And a thought would crawl in. Why them? Why not me? Why didn't I drive that day? What kind of universe punishes love like this? This wasn't sadness anymore. This was fury, not against someone, not against the driver who caused the crash. He had died too. Not against God. Daniel had stopped believing in that long ago. No, this was anger against existence itself, against the random, merciless unfolding of life, against the fact that no matter how careful you are, how good you try to be, you're not safe.
And that's when the temptation came. The temptation to hate, to drink, to stop going to work, to stop returning calls, to let the bitterness grow so loud it drowned everything else out. One night, Daniel opened the liquor cabinet. Maria kept a bottle of red wine there, untouched for months. He poured himself a glass, stared at it. The fire inside wanted it. Not for taste, for numbness, for escape. He picked it up, held it, then stopped. He remembered another line from Meditations. The best revenge is not to be like your enemy. Daniel wasn't thinking of a literal enemy, but he knew what the enemy was now. Despair, self-pity, the seductive pull of destruction. He put the glass down. Instead, he picked up his notebook and wrote the sentence, "Today, I did not drink. Today, I felt the fire, and I chose to contain it." That became his new ritual. Each time the anger returned, each time the world felt like a cruel joke, he would sit down, breathe, and write. Not poems, not philosophy, just truth. I hate the unfairness of this. I miss their voices. I am still here, and I don't know why. No filters, no edits, just raw clarity. Over time, those pages piled up. They weren't confessions. They were confrontations. Daniel wasn't avoiding his emotions. He was facing them with discipline, and that's what made all the difference. Because Stoicism is often misunderstood. People think it means suppression, but the Stoics never said, "Don't feel." They said, "Feel deeply, but never be ruled." Marcus Aurelius had written while losing his children, his friends, his health. He didn't escape his sorrow. He examined it daily. That's what Daniel was doing now. One afternoon, he sat by the window, a storm outside, rain tracing rivers down the glass. He thought about how Maria used to love storms, said they reminded her of being young, how chaos could feel strangely safe. Daniel smiled for the first time in weeks. Not a happy smile, but a remembering one. He whispered to the room, "You would have made tea right now and told me to stop brooding. You hated brooding." And just like that, something shifted inside him. The rage didn't leave, but it softened. It changed shape. It became fire, but not destructive, creative. Pain is a wild horse. You either ride it or it tramples you. Daniel chose the saddle. He didn't suppress his grief. He disciplined it. He didn't perform strength. He forged it. Because in a world where men are either told to cry everything out or shut it all down, Daniel did something braver. He contained the fire, not to kill it, but to use it. He started running again, waking up early, not to escape, but to test himself, push his lungs, feel his muscles ache, prove that his body was still alive even if his soul felt wrecked. He went back to work, not because he was ready, but because he refused to let despair dictate his calendar. He cleaned the garage, donated most of Ellie's toys, kept only a few in a wooden box he built with his own hands. He framed one of her drawings and placed it on his desk, not to mourn, but to remember what love looked like in crayon. This wasn't moving on. This was moving through the ashes, through the rage, through the fire inside. Daniel wasn't healed. Healing isn't a finish line, but he was anchored. He had not let the fire consume him. He had taken the heat and forged a new steel from it.
The kind of strength no one sees at first glance, but that holds you together when the world falls apart again.
Rebuilding without clinging. Grief doesn't ask for your permission, but rebuilding, that's a choice, a slow, stubborn, conscious one. For Daniel, the decision to rebuild came quietly, not in a grand moment, not with some motivational breakthrough. Just one morning while folding laundry. He was pairing socks. Maria always did that. She'd joke that mismatched socks were a sign of creative rebellion. He chuckled to himself, then stopped and realized something. He wasn't crying. He wasn't angry. He was simply doing the next thing. This was the beginning of rebuilding. Not a leap, a step. Not a resolution, a rhythm. But rebuilding after loss is not like building from scratch. It's more like clearing a burned forest.
The old roots are still there. The scent of smoke still lingers, and every move forward feels like betrayal. That was Daniel's next battle: guilt. Guilt when he laughed at a coworker's joke. Guilt when he went to the movies with his brother. Guilt when he began to feel just slightly okay. It whispered, "How dare you feel joy again? If you smile, will they fade from memory? Is rebuilding the same as forgetting?" But then came another passage from Meditations, one that landed deeper than before. Do not waste what remains of your life in speculation about others. Be content with what you are doing in the present moment. Daniel realized his grief wasn't just about Maria and Ellie. It was also about him clinging to what was, because letting go felt like disloyalty. But Stoicism reminded him, letting go is not betrayal. It's alignment with nature, with impermanence, with truth. So Daniel began a new discipline, letting go, piece by piece. He sold their family car. It sat in the driveway, unused for months. He kept one of Ellie's drawings in the glove compartment, a reminder, not a relic. He deleted old voicemails, but wrote down the words he loved most, not to erase them, to carry them differently. He stopped visiting the crash site every weekend. Instead, he planted 2 trees in his backyard, one for each of them. Watered them every Sunday, in silence, with purpose. Letting go wasn't forgetting. It was choosing how to remember, without being enslaved by the past. Most people think rebuilding means recreating what was lost. But real rebuilding means becoming something new, while honoring what shaped you. Daniel didn't try to replace his old life. He forged a new one, with space for the past, but not chains. That fall, Daniel did something unexpected. He booked a solo trip. Montana, a remote cabin, no Wi-Fi, just nature. Maria used to joke she'd never survive a day without her phone. Ellie would have brought a backpack full of stuffed animals. Daniel hiked alone, cooked simple meals, read Meditations again, this time not as scripture but as dialogue. One evening, watching the sun drop behind a ridge, he whispered to the wind, "I'm still your husband. I'm still your father, but I'm also me, alive, changing, moving forward." He returned home with something new in his heart. Not closure, not healing. Permission. Permission to live without shame, to smile without explanation, to rebuild without clinging. He didn't change everything overnight, just the small things. He redecorated the bedroom, kept one picture of Maria and Ellie, but repainted the walls. He started attending community lectures, met others who had lost people too. He even agreed to coffee with a woman named Rachel, a widow herself. It wasn't a date, just 2 souls sipping something warm, sharing silence. He didn't feel butterflies. He didn't feel guilt. He just felt open. And that was enough. Because rebuilding isn't about falling in love again. It's about falling back into life again. And Daniel, slowly, courageously, was doing exactly that. There's a kind of man who breaks when life breaks him. There's another kind of man who becomes bitter. But then there's a third man, a rare kind. The kind who learns how to let go. Not with indifference, but with integrity. The kind who accepts that every joy comes with risk. That love can end, but the ability to love again never dies, unless you let it. Daniel Reeves was becoming that kind of man, not by denying what he'd lost, but by choosing not to be lost with it. You don't need to let go all at once. You just need to stop clinging, because only empty hands can rebuild. Only open hands can receive what life offers next. The stillness beyond suffering. Daniel once believed peace would come like a storm breaking, sudden, violent, unmistakable. But the real peace, the kind Stoicism had been quietly pointing to, arrived like the opposite of a storm. It came through stillness. One morning, months after the anniversary of the accident, Daniel sat alone on his back porch. A light breeze played with the leaves. The two trees he'd planted, one for Maria, one for Ellie, swayed ever so slightly. He wasn't thinking about work. He wasn't replaying old memories. He wasn't trying to feel better. He was just present. And in that presence, there was no agony, no rage, no clinging, just a quiet breath. And for the first time in years, it didn't carry the weight of survival.
It carried a kind of serenity. Daniel had reached what the Stoics called ataraxia, a tranquil state of mind, unshaken by fate or fortune. It didn't mean he didn't feel. It meant his emotions no longer ruled him. It didn't mean he stopped missing them. It meant he no longer suffered because of that missing. Pain is inevitable, he remembered Epictetus saying, but suffering is optional. And now he understood. Suffering isn't what life does to us. It's what we do with what life does to us. He looked around his house. It wasn't full anymore, but it wasn't empty either. It was different, quieter, simpler, and yet somehow deeper. He'd removed the clutter, literal and emotional, let go of relationships that only offered pity, distanced himself from noise disguised as support, chose instead a life where solitude was no longer loneliness, but sacred space. In a culture obsessed with constant healing, Daniel chose stillness, not progress, not productivity, not perpetual motion, just presence. And in that stillness, he found what so many search for in therapists, lovers, substances, distractions: peace. One evening, a friend asked him over dinner, "How did you do it, man? How did you survive something like that?" Daniel paused, then smiled. Not a performative smile, but the kind born from scars that no longer bleed. "I didn't survive," he said. "I transformed." The man looked confused. Daniel explained, "There's a part of me that died with them, and there's a part of me that was born because of them. I'm not who I was, but I like who I'm becoming." Stoicism had never promised happiness. It had promised something better. Freedom. Freedom from emotional slavery. Freedom from demanding that life be fair. Freedom from the illusion that love makes us invincible. What it offered instead was resilience, perspective, clarity, a roadmap through hell without pretending hell didn't exist. Daniel didn't become a monk. He didn't write a book. He didn't start a grief podcast. He simply lived more honestly, more quietly, more powerfully than before. He cooked more. He read more. He called his parents weekly.
He planted a small garden. He taught a neighborhood kid how to build a wooden birdhouse. He existed without the need to prove anything. He was no longer running from pain nor running toward happiness. He was simply grounded. And one night, before sleep, he placed a hand over his chest, felt the beating, felt the warmth, and whispered, "I've lost much, but I've gained something rare. I've found a way to live without demanding more."
Because rebuilding isn't about falling in love again. It's about falling back into life again. And Daniel, slowly, courageously, was doing exactly that. There's a kind of man who breaks when life breaks him. There's another kind of man who becomes bitter. But then there's a third man, a rare kind. The kind who learns how to let go. Not with indifference, but with integrity. The kind who accepts that every joy comes with risk. That love can end, but the ability to love again never dies. Unless you let it. Daniel Reeves was becoming that kind of man. Not by denying what he'd lost, but by choosing not to be lost with it. You don't need to let go all at once. You just need to stop clinging, because only empty hands can rebuild. Only open hands can receive what life offers next. The stillness beyond suffering. Daniel once believed peace would come like a storm breaking, sudden, violent, unmistakable. But the real peace, the kind Stoicism had been quietly pointing to, arrived like the opposite of a storm. It came through stillness. One morning, months after the anniversary of the accident, Daniel sat alone on his back porch. A light breeze played with the leaves. The two trees he'd planted, one for Maria, one for Ellie, swayed ever so slightly. He wasn't thinking about work. He wasn't replaying old memories. He wasn't trying to feel better. He was just present. And in that presence, there was no agony, no rage, no clinging, just a quiet breath. And for the first time in years, it didn't carry the weight of survival.